There are some supplemental technologies that might be available for us in the cloud. For example, a web application firewall. These are not restricted to just the cloud, but sometimes our cloud providers give us tools such as a web application firewall. So this is so basically a application firewall is a layer 7 firewall that understands HTTP traffic and understands the HTTP protocol, and it can be very effective against denial of service attacks. It understands injection attacks and things like that, so it can monitor those types of attacks and it can thwart those types of attacks. And again, it's an option usually that we can enable with our cloud service providers. We can utilize some of these tools. Another tool we might be able to utilize is database activity monitoring. So a database activity monitor is another layer 7 device that, and by the way, when I say layer 7, I'm referring to the 7 layers of the OSI model, or the 5th layer in the TCP model, which is really more realistic. But basically, it understands SQL. So just like a web application firewall understands HTTP, a database application firewall understands SQL, and it knows to not allow certain commands and certain things to happen with SQL. So, for example, if you run a SQL statement that says delete from table, insert whatever is the table name, right? Delete from patient, delete from customer, delete from address. It would just delete everything. So a database activity monitoring tool might sort of intercept that command and return an error to the user saying you can't just run a blanket delete statement against the database. It's not allowed. You have to provide some kind of where clause, which would restrict the number of rows that are being deleted or what's being deleted. Or you may completely restrict the ability to delete it all for whatever reason. Instead, you might opt for some other method. And there's other ways to secure these things, but certainly a database activity monitoring tool is a way to do that. XML, I've talked about XML when I talked about APIs. XML is important to the cloud because it's used by APIs and it's central to how APIs work. We use XML for lots of different things in the cloud. It's a very extensible data structure that we can use to store information in objects and things like that. And again, we use it for APIs. So you can also implement API or XML gateways that can be hardware or software. Typically in the cloud, it'll be some kind of software that our cloud provider can either provide for us so that we can install some kind of VM that does this for us. But it implements some security controls such as data loss prevention, antivirus, anti-malware services. And DLP is probably a big one here because XML is the format that usually our data is leaving our cloud-based data centers or our cloud-based infrastructure and platform. So if we have some mechanism that can monitor that and has an understanding of XML, and you're probably seeing a theme here, all these different things are protocol aware. These are protocol aware security tools. So an XML aware tool can monitor XML and understands XML enough to know when to block certain things. But overall, all of these different things I've described, they're mostly firewalls, right? So all these things that I talked about are firewalls. And we talked earlier about firewalls in this course. I talked about software-defined networking, and firewalls in the cloud are typically software-defined networking. So they're software firewalls or firewalls that are running as software in the cloud that we can use sort of marshal traffic and to block traffic coming into and out of our virtualized data centers or our cloud-based infrastructure. So firewalls are certainly important. So firewalls should be installed and implemented in our cloud-based infrastructure. And why we talk about firewalls in an application type of, in our application section of this course is because these application-aware firewalls or protocol-aware firewalls can work alongside traditional firewalls like, stateful packet inspection, things like that. So it's another layer of security. So an API gateway is basically a firewall for our APIs. API gateways, what you do with an API gateway is it's sort of rather than API calls going directly to applications, the API gateway is receiving those API calls and then it's translating those or transforming those or maybe even just passing those through after it does some type of filtering or something like that on the API call, and then it returns the result. And a lot of times these API gateways rely on common standards like WSDLs or WSDL, which is used with RESTful web services or with SOAP-based web services. There's also the enterprise service bus. So sometimes API gateways can work on the ESB in order to implement or to marshal these different APIs between different API nodes.